New York City, July 25th, 1956, 11:47 p.m. The Copacabana was sold out. This was not news. The Copacabana had been sold out for Martin and Lewis since the beginning. Since the specific beginning that existed before sold out was even the relevant measure, which was 1946 at the Club 500 in Atlantic City, when the two of them had been put together on a bill by accident, and the accident had become the most successful comedy act in America in approximately 14 months. 10 years. Tonight was the 10th anniversary. The show had been going for 43 minutes. By any measure that a full room of people watching two men work together could apply, the show was extraordinary. The laughs were where the laughs had always been. The chemistry, the specific living chemistry of two people who had spent 10 years in each other's presence to the point where each one's timing was encoded in the other's body, was present. The music was there. The chaos was there. The thing that the Copacabana's audience had come to see was being given to them in full. Nobody in the room knew that in approximately 40 minutes, the thing they were watching would be over. Not for tonight. Forever. Dean Martin knew. Jerry Lewis knew. Neither of them had said this to the other in language that the other had directly received. They had been in the specific communication mode of two people who are unable to name the thing that is happening and who have therefore been naming it obliquely, through the silences, through the specific quality of the distance that had opened between them across the past year, through the conversations that stopped at the edge of the thing and turned back without crossing it. But they both knew. And so what they gave the Copacabana on the night of July 25th, 1956, was the specific quality of people who are giving something for the last time and who cannot say it is the last time, and who therefore give it completely, as if completeness were the only available form of acknowledgement. Dean walked to the microphone. He was 38 years old. He was wearing the dark charcoal tuxedo jacket and the white formal dress shirt and the black bow tie, and his dark hair was slicked back in the specific way it was slicked back for performances, and his face had the performing ease of someone for whom this platform, stage, room, microphone, audience was the most natural habitat of his existence. He sang, not That's Amore, not the song the audience expected first. He sang something slower, Return to Me, the Italian ballad that had been in his repertoire since 1958. He sang it, and the Copacabana received it the way the Copacabana received Dean Martin singing, which was with the warmth of 400 people who understood that what they were receiving was the genuine article. Jerry Lewis stood at the side of the stage. He was watching Dean sing. This was not unusual. Their act had always included these moments. Dean at the microphone, singing properly, and Jerry at the edge, supposedly standing still, but never actually standing still, the comedy emerging from the contrast between the composed singer and the barely contained chaos beside him. It was one of the foundational bits of the Martin and Lewis act. The audience knew it. They were watching for it. What was different tonight? What was not visible to the audience, but was visible to the people in the room who had watched Martin and Lewis for 10 years and knew the difference between the performing Jerry and the actual Jerry, was that Jerry was watching Dean with an expression the performance had not produced. He was watching the way someone watches something they know they are seeing for the last time. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit the like button, because what happened in the Copacabana on the night of July 25th, 1956, the last 40 minutes of something that had been one of the most extraordinary creative partnerships in American entertainment, is one of the true stories about what it looks like when two people give everything to something they know is ending and cannot say is ending. Stay, now, back to the stage. Dean is singing, Jerry is watching, and nobody in the room knows what the two of them know. The partnership of Martin and Lewis had produced, across 10 years, 23 feature films, thousands of nightclub performances, radio shows, and the specific cultural phenomenon of two men who had figured out something about being funny together that neither of them had known was possible. They had met in 1945. Dean Martin was Dino Paul Crossetti, 28 years old, a singer from Steubenville, Ohio, who had been working the club circuit since he was 17 and who had, by 1945, the specific combination of good looks and a good voice, and the ease of someone who has been performing long enough that performing is simply the thing he does, without effort visible. Jerry Lewis was Joseph Levitch, 19 years old, a comedian from Newark, New Jersey, who had been working as a single since he was 15, and who had, by 1945, the specific energy of someone who contained more material than any single performance could accommodate, the hyperkinetic intelligence, the physical comedy, the specific shambling chaos of someone for whom stillness was structurally impossible. They should not have worked. The logic of what they were separately did not predict what they became together. What they became together was the most popular entertainment act in America, not for a year, not for a season, but across a decade, with a consistency that the entertainment industry had not seen at that scale before. They had figured out, by accident and then by design, the specific relationship between Dean's composure and Jerry's chaos. The composure made the chaos funnier, the chaos made the composure more charming. Each one required the other's specific quality to produce what the act produced. Separately, they were successful. Together, they were something that the separately versions could not account for. And then, slowly, then faster, then suddenly, it had broken. Not cleanly, not from one specific cause. The way most things break that have been under sustained pressure across many years, from the accumulation of small strains until the small strains were not small anymore, until the distance between two people who had been in each other's professional lives every day for 10 years had become the specific distance of people who no longer knew how to be in the same room without the performance to organize them. Dean had wanted the separation. Not from Jerry, exactly, from what Martin and Lewis had become, from the specific constraint of a partnership that had over 10 years organized so completely around the comedy that Dean's singing had become secondary, that the voice he had been building since Steubenville had been reduced to the straight man function of the act. He wanted to be a singer. He wanted to be Dean Martin the singer, not Dean Martin of Martin and Lewis. Jerry had wanted to continue. This was not simply attachment to what they had built, though it was that too. Jerry understood, in the specific way of someone whose genius was inseparable from his specific context, that what made him what he was required Dean, the chaos, required the composure. The comedy required the specific warm receiving target of Dean's ease. Without Dean, Jerry was still funny. Without Dean, Jerry was not what Martin and Lewis had been. They had been unable to say any of this to each other directly, which was why they were at the Copa Cabana on July 25, 1956, giving everything they had, saying nothing. The show was 43 minutes in when Jerry broke. Not visibly, not in a way the audience could see, in the way that something breaks inside a performance when the performer allows themselves for a moment to feel what is happening rather than execute what is happening. He was supposed to interrupt Dean's singing, the specific bit where Jerry walked into the middle of a song and created chaos, which Dean would navigate with the flat, amused ease of someone who had been navigating Jerry's chaos for 10 years and was mildly inconvenienced by it. He walked to the microphone. He did not create chaos. He stood beside Dean, not performing, standing. Dean looked at him. The audience laughed. They were trained by 10 years to find whatever Jerry did funny. And then Dean did something that was not in the act. He put his arm around Jerry's shoulders, not in the performing way, in the other way, the way you put your arm around someone when the performing is over and the person underneath the performing is the one you are addressing. 400 people in the Copacabana did not know what they were seeing. They saw two men and they laughed. Dean and Jerry knew what they were seeing. For approximately 4 seconds, on the stage of the Copacabana, on the night of July 25, 1956, Dean Martin had his arm around Jerry Lewis, and neither of them was performing, and the audience was laughing at something they thought was a bit. Then Dean went back to the microphone. Then Jerry created the chaos. The show continued. The show was extraordinary. 400 people went home talking about what a night it had been. The backstage corridor of the Copacabana after the show was narrow and warm, with the specific heat of a summer night in New York, and the ambient warmth of a room that had held 400 people for 2 hours. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis did not have the conversation in the corridor. They did not have it in the dressing rooms. They did not have it that night. They did not have it the next day, or the day after, or in the weeks that followed, while the formal machinery of the split processed itself through lawyers and managers and the entertainment industry's specific institutional apparatus for the dissolution of a partnership. The conversation that should have happened in the corridor after July 25, 1956, did not happen between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis for 20 years. 20 years. That is the number. The specific silence between two people who had been in each other's professional and personal lives every day for 10 years. The silence that replaced the daily presence that was the negative space of everything they had done together. The silence lasted from July of 1956 until September of 1976. It lasted through the careers they built separately, through the films and the television shows and the Las Vegas residencies and the specific success that each of them achieved independently. Dean Martin becoming what he had always wanted to become, the singer, the television host, the Las Vegas performer. Jerry Lewis becoming what he had always been heading toward, the director-auteur, the filmmaker, the institution. It lasted through everything, until Frank Sinatra decided that it had lasted long enough. The MDA Labor Day Telethon on September 5, 1976. Jerry Lewis had been hosting it since 1966. It was 20 hours of live television, and Jerry was at the center of it, as he was every year, as he would be for years to come. He did not know Dean Martin was going to walk through the door. Frank Sinatra had arranged it, not as a stunt, not as a television moment designed for maximum impact, or not only that, as the specific act of a man who had been beside both of them across the 20 years of the silence, and who understood that the silence had gone on long enough and that someone needed to open the door. He walked out with Dean and Jerry Lewis, who had been doing live television for 20 hours and who had seen everything that could happen in a live television context, and who was beyond surprise in the way that someone beyond exhaustion is beyond surprise, saw Dean Martin walk through the door of Studio 4 at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas. And he held it together for exactly 3 seconds. And then he did not hold it together. He crossed the stage. Dean Martin, 60 years old, wearing a dark suit, the silver-gray hair that was now completely silver, the deeply weathered face of 20 more years, held out his hand. Jerry Lewis walked past the hand. He put his arms around Dean Martin. 20 years of silence, held in 2 arms on a live television stage in Las Vegas. The audience in the studio and the audience watching on television saw 2 men who had not been in the same room for 20 years, holding each other on a stage. What they were actually seeing was July 25, 1956, catching up to September 5, 1976. The goodbye that had not been said in the corridor of the Copacabana, finally being said on a television stage in Las Vegas. The arm that Dean had put around Jerry's shoulders for 4 seconds in the middle of the show. The real gesture, the non-performing gesture, the thing that only they had known was happening while the audience laughed at what they thought was a bit. That arm, 20 years later, received. Dean and Jerry performed together on the telethon for approximately 8 minutes. They were extraordinary, not because they had rehearsed. They had not rehearsed. Because the 10 years was still there. Because whatever had been between them, whatever specific creative chemistry had produced the most successful entertainment act in America across a decade, had not gone away during the 20 years. It had been in storage, in the silence, waiting. And in 8 minutes on a live television stage in Las Vegas, it came back out and was still what it had been. The audience understood that they were watching something that could not have been planned. The specific electricity of two people who had been together and been apart and were briefly, for 8 minutes, together again. 8 minutes. And then Dean walked back off the stage. And that was also the last time. Not July 25th, 1956. Not the Copa, but September 5th, 1976. The brief return, and then the permanent goodbye that was also not spoken. Jerry Lewis died on August 20th, 2017. He was 91 years old. Dean Martin had died on December 25th, 1995. In the years between September 1976 and December 1995, 19 years, they had been in occasional contact, not the daily contact of the partnership years, not the silence of the 20 years, something in between. The specific relationship of two people who had been through something together that could not be undone, and who had been through the silence of not speaking about it, and who now existed in the aftermath of both. Jerry Lewis spoke about Dean Martin after Dean's death. He said, "I loved him." 3 words. The conversation in the Copacabana corridor that had not happened. 20 years of silence. 8 minutes in Las Vegas. 19 more years of the in-between. And 3 words after. I loved him. That is the whole of it. That is what the last show at the Copacabana contained that nobody in the room knew it contained. The arm around the shoulders for 4 seconds. The laugh track covering the real moment. 400 people going home talking about what a great show it had been. And 2 men in a corridor who did not have the conversation. And 20 years of not having it. And then 8 minutes in Las Vegas that said it anyway. And then 3 words in 1995. That is still the whole of it. The arm around the shoulders. For 4 seconds. In the middle of a bit. While 400 people laughed. Nobody knowing it was goodbye. That is the whole of it. Still, there is a witness account that belongs in this record. A woman named Patricia Elmore had been coming to Martin and Lewis shows since 1948. She had seen them at the Copa 4 times before July 25th, 1956. She was there on the last night. She wrote in her diary that night. She kept a diary, the specific practice of someone who understood that the things she experienced were worth recording. She wrote about the show. She described the laugh count. She described the songs. She described the specific bits she recognized from previous shows. She described the new material. And then, at the end of the entry, she wrote 1 paragraph. She wrote, "There was a moment tonight when Dean put his arm around Jerry in the middle of a song. I've seen them do physical bits 100 times. This was not a bit. I don't know how I knew. It was the same arm, the same gesture, the same stage, but it was not a bit. I felt it from the 4th row. Something was happening between them that was not for us. And then it was over, and Jerry did something funny, and we all laughed, and the show continued. I've been trying since I got home to say what it was I saw. I think what I saw was 2 people saying something to each other that they couldn't say any other way." She said, "I might be wrong. It might have been a bit." She said, "I don't think I'm wrong." The diary entry is dated July 26, 1956. The split was announced the following day. Patricia Elmore did not know what was coming when she wrote the entry. She wrote it because she felt something in a room and understood that she had felt something and that the feeling deserved a record. She was right. It was not a bit. It was the arm around the shoulders. It was 4 seconds. It was the goodbye that could not be said any other way. It was 2 men giving everything to something they knew was ending, on a stage in New York, in front of 400 people who were laughing at what they thought was a bit, and 1 woman in the 4th row who felt what it actually was, and wrote it down, so that this could be said. That is the whole of it. Still, Jerry Lewis gave an interview in 2014 to a film journalist named Marcus Rowe. The interview covered his career, his films, his relationship with French cinema, the specific legacy of his work. Near the end of the interview, Rowe asked about Dean Martin. Jerry was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The last night at the Copa, July of '56. Do you know what I remember most about it?" Rowe said, "What?" Jerry said, "I remember that it was the best show we ever did." He said, "Not the most famous, not the most technically accomplished, the best, the one that had everything in it." He was quiet. He said, "I've thought about why, for almost 60 years, why that night, of all nights, why the last one." He said, "I think it's because we both knew, and because we couldn't say it, and because when you can't say something, sometimes what you do instead is give everything you have." He said, "The audience came to see Martin and Lewis. They saw Martin and Lewis. They saw the best Martin and Lewis there was." He said, "And none of them knew." He was quiet. Rowe said, "Did you know it was the last time?" Jerry said, "I knew something was ending. I didn't let myself know it was that specific thing. You don't let yourself know things like that. You don't have the language for it. You go out and you do the show." He said, "Dean put his arm around me in the middle of a song. It was in the act. It looked like the act. The audience laughed because it looked like the act." He said, "It was not the act." He said, "I knew what it was. I think Dean knew what it was." He said, "Neither of us said it." He looked at the journalist. He said, "20 years later, Frank Sinatra brought Dean through a door in Las Vegas, and I held on to him for about as long as someone can hold on to someone on live television without it becoming something they can't recover from." He said, "And that was also the last time, and nobody knew that either." He said, "That's how goodbyes go when you don't know how to say goodbye. You don't say them. The thing just ends, and then you spend 20 years in the silence, and then someone opens a door, and you hold on for as long as you can." He said, "And then that ends too." He was quiet for a long time. He said, "I loved him." He said it to the journalist. He said it to the room. He said it to July 25th, 1956. He said it to the arm around the shoulders. He said it to the 4 seconds in the middle of a bit, while 400 people laughed at what they thought they were seeing. 3 words. 20 years too late. The right amount. That is still the whole of it.